https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=oyamlutbeo. Transcript. If you have ever loved someone who treated your loyalty like something they could afford to throw away, stay with me because this one is for you. Subscribe now so you never miss what comes next. Jackson Reed was 39 years old and he believed, truly believed, that a quiet man who kept his promises was worth more than a loud man who made them. He had built his whole life on that idea. His marriage, his career, his patience. He was wrong about one thing. He thought his wife believed it, too. He did not know, not yet, that for the past 8 months she had been whispering another man's name into her phone at 2 o'clock in the morning while Jackson slept 4 feet away on the living room couch. And he did not know, not yet, that the divorce papers, already signed and sealed in his laptop bag, were about to change the course of both their lives forever. Here is the part that might surprise you. Jackson was not leaving because he was broken. He was leaving because he was ready. Atlanta, November 2020, 2:14 in the morning. A light drizzle fell over the midtown skyline, the kind that does not quite commit to being rain, just enough to blur the streetlights and make the world feel a little softer than it deserves to be. Inside their apartment on the 14th floor, Jackson Reed lay on the living room couch with his eyes open. He had not ended up there by accident. He had been sleeping there for 4 months ever since the night he first heard her laughing. That particular laugh, soft and low, the kind she used to save only for him, drifting from behind the closed bedroom door at midnight. He had stood outside that door for a long time. Then he went back to the couch and he started making plans. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of tires on wet pavement 12 stories below. Jackson lay still staring at a small crack in the ceiling plaster he had been meaning to patch for 2 years. He never got around to it. He was always working, always building something for later. On the kitchen island, Lucia's phone lit up. He did not move. He did not need to. From across the room, he could read the preview on the screen. Ephraim Langston, 2:14 a.m. leaving the St. Regis now. You were incredible tonight. Don't tell the boring engineer you'll be late tomorrow. Boring engineer. Jackson read it twice. Not because he needed to, because he wanted to feel it completely. Wanted to press his thumb right on that bruise one final time so that when he stood up from this couch, he would never need to feel it again. He stood up. He moved through the apartment the way a man moves when he has already grieved everything and come out the other side. Slowly, deliberately, without drama. He went to the bedroom closet and pulled out the suitcase he had quietly packed 2 weeks earlier and stored behind his winter coats. Inside, his laptop, his digital sketchbook, the hard drive containing every blueprint and model he had ever poured into Forge Dynamics, his startup, the one Lucia called your little hobby project. Whenever her friends came over for dinner, he carried the suitcase to the front door and set it down gently. Then he went back to the kitchen counter and opened the drawer where he had kept the envelope for the past 4 months. The divorce papers, finalized, signed, witnessed. He had been thorough. He was an engineer. He was always thorough. He set them on the kitchen island, beside Lucia's phone. Then he reached into his pocket and removed his wedding ring. He paused in the dark kitchen for a moment. He turned the ring over once in his fingers, felt the weight of it, the cool smoothness of it, pressed it to his lips, not out of sentiment, out of respect for the man he had been, for the promises he had kept even when she had not. He whispered, almost to himself, loyalty isn't negotiable. He set the ring on top of the envelope, perfectly centered. No note, no explanation. There was nothing left to say that the ring did not say better. He picked up his suitcase, walked to the door, stepped through. The deadbolt clicked shut behind him. In the quiet of the 14th floor, that sound echoed like a verdict. The next morning, Lucia woke to sunlight and an empty apartment. She stretched, checked her phone, smiled at Ephraim's message, padded out to the kitchen in her silk robe to start the coffee. She saw the ring first, then the envelope. For exactly 3 seconds, she smiled. Finally. Then she opened it. The smile disappeared. Her hands started shaking. She read it twice, 3 times, the way you read something you desperately want to mean something different. Her eyes moved from the papers to the ring to the empty couch to the closet where his coats used to hang. She grabbed her phone and called Ephraim. He divorced me. On the other end, a pause, then a sleepy, unbothered laugh. Well, guess the boring engineer finally grew a spine. Lucia stood alone in the kitchen, the divorce papers trembling in her hand, and felt the first cold thread of something she could not yet name. She had no idea she had just set a 5-year clock in motion. She had no idea what or who was waiting at the end of it. Stay with me because the man she called boring was about to build something she never imagined. And she was about to spend 5 years learning exactly what she had walked away from. Did Lucia deserve to see that Forbes cover? Or did she deserve worse? Drop your verdict in the comments. 5 years is a long time. Long enough to build something extraordinary. Long enough to watch something beautiful decay down to its foundation. Long enough to realize when you were standing alone in a mansion bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning, unable to remember the last time anyone asked how you were doing and actually waited for the answer, that the most costly mistake of your life did not involve money at all. November 2025, Buckhead, Atlanta. Lucia Langston, formerly Lucia Reed, had everything a woman was supposed to want. A 12-room house with cathedral ceilings, a wine cellar a decorator had flown in from Milan to design, a closet larger than the apartment she had once shared with Jackson, filled with things that cost more than she used to earn in a month. She also had a husband who looked at her the way a collector looks at a sculpture. Present, polished, decorative, do not touch. You wore that last season. Ephraim said one Thursday morning without looking up from his phone as Lucia adjusted the strap on a dress. Wear the Valentino. We are meeting the Hargroves tonight and I need you to look like you belong. Lucia looked at herself in the full-length mirror. She looked exactly like she belonged. That was the problem. The Ephraim she had chosen had seemed effortlessly charming, always reaching for another bottle of something expensive, always the loudest laugh in the room. He had made Jackson seem like a library book, reliable, worthy of respect, just not exciting. What she had not understood then was the difference between a man who makes you feel electric and a man who makes you feel safe. One of those is a drug. The other one is a home. Ephraim had never once asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. Jackson used to pull his chair a little closer when she talked about work. She remembered that now. Sometimes, at dinner parties, when Ephraim was telling a story he had already told twice, and she was smiling beside him with a champagne flute in her hand, feeling perfectly, completely alone. But she was still good at her job. That, at least, was hers, which was why, when the Atlanta Riverfront Renaissance Project, a $1.8 billion urban revitalization effort, issued its PR contractor brief, Lucia had fought for that contract with everything she had. She pitched for 6 weeks straight, worked through weekends while Ephraim hosted poker nights downstairs, delivered a 40-slide presentation to a panel of 12, and walked out of that room knowing she had earned it. When the award came through, Ephraim barely glanced at the email she forwarded him. "Good," he said. "Now you will have something to do besides reorganizing the pantry." Lucia smiled, opened her laptop, got back to work. The project brief listed 6 major contractors and consultants. She scrolled through them one by one. When she reached number 4, a prop tech and structural development firm called Forge Dynamics, she noted the CEO listed as J. Reed, and paused for barely a second before moving on. Reed was a common enough name. She told herself that. She had also told herself, for 5 years, that Jackson was probably still somewhere in Atlanta, still a working engineer, still quiet and steady, and building careful, small things for other people. In the first year after the divorce, she had searched his name twice online. Nothing significant came up. She had taken that as confirmation. The man she had left was exactly where she had left him. She had been wrong. She simply did not know it yet. In the evenings, after Ephraim's guests cleared out and the house settled into its expensive silence, Lucia had a habit she had never confessed to anyone. Hidden in the bottom drawer of her writing desk, beneath old event programs and a broken watch, was a single photograph. The only one she had kept when Ephraim demanded she delete every image of her former life before their wedding. She had agreed out loud, deleted everything in his presence, and airdropped this one photograph to a private email account first. It was from March 2018. She and Jackson, standing in front of the first commercial building his firm had ever worked on. He had his arm around her shoulder. She was laughing at something he had just said. She could no longer remember what. And he was looking at her the way he always did, like she was the most interesting person in every room he had ever been in. She would put the photo away quickly, close the drawer, tell herself it meant nothing. She almost believed it. On a Tuesday morning in the third week of November, Lucia was at her desk with coffee going cold beside her keyboard, scrolling through the latest Forbes digital edition as background research for the Riverfront project. She was skimming investor profiles, market trends, names she recognized from the Atlanta development community. She stopped scrolling. The cover photograph filled her screen. A tall black man in a dark bespoke suit, standing at a floor-to-ceiling window with Atlanta's skyline spread out behind him. A neatly trimmed beard, calm, sharp eyes that held the quiet certainty of a man who had already decided how every room he entered was going to go. The headline read, "Jackson Reed, the silent architect who built a $2.2 billion empire in silence." The coffee cup slipped in Lucia's hand. She caught it, barely. She read the headline again, then the subhead. How Forge Dynamics became the most disruptive prop tech firm in the Southeast, and why its CEO is someone almost no one saw coming. She set the cup down. She was very aware of her own breathing. She read the full article, twice. Forge Dynamics, founded 2020. First major contract secured through competitive bid in 2021. By 2023, expanded to Charlotte, Nashville, and Houston. By 2024, a $900 million institutional investment raised the firm's valuation to $1.4 billion. Then, 8 months ago, the Atlanta Riverfront Renaissance contract, the same one Lucia's PR firm had just been hired to lead communications for, pushed Forge Dynamics past the $2.2 billion mark. J. Reed, 3 weeks ago. She had looked at those two letters and decided they meant nothing. She pressed her palm flat against the desk, felt the cool, solid surface of it. She thought about the nights Jackson used to sit at the kitchen table after dinner. The quiet scratch of his stylus on the digital sketchbook. The occasional low exhale. The way he whispered structural calculations to himself in the dark. She had found it tedious. She had found him tedious. She had once told Ephraim, during those early, intoxicating months, that her former husband was a good man, but a small dreamer. She had believed that. She stared at the Forbes cover, at the Atlanta skyline, a skyline her former husband had, in 5 years of silent, sleepless work, helped reshape. From down the hall, Ephraim's voice boomed through a phone call, his laugh shaking the walls. "Tell them I am not moving on the valuation, not a dollar." Lucia sat very still. She had walked past a Forbes cover story. She had looked at the initials of the man she once called boring and decided they were a coincidence. And in 8 days, she was going to walk into a conference room and sit across the table from him. She closed the Forbes app, opened her pitch deck, told herself she was a professional, told herself this was business, told herself she was fine. Her hands did not stop trembling for the rest of the afternoon. She thought she was prepared. She had no idea what was waiting for her in that conference room, or what it would cost her to finally look him in the eye again. She scrolled right past his name, right past it. Comment. She knew, or she had no idea. Where do you land? The morning of the Riverfront Project kickoff meeting. Lucia arrived 20 minutes early. That was intentional. She always arrived early to high-stakes meetings. It gave her time to read the room, settle her breathing, remind herself that she was good at this. She had pitched boardrooms full of skeptics and walked out with contracts. She could handle one meeting. She had been telling herself that for 8 days. The conference room on the 32nd floor was all glass and Georgia light. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the south wall. A long oval table of pale ash wood. The kind of space that makes everyone at the table feel like they are doing something that matters. The Atlanta skyline spread out below like an argument for ambition. Lucia set up her materials, poured water, adjusted her blazer, checked her phone, put her phone away. Other attendees filed in. The project director, 2 city council liaisons, representatives from the civil engineering and architectural teams, a communications strategist from the mayor's office. She made small talk, said all the right things, smiled at all the right moments. Then the door opened again. Something shifted in the room. Not loudly, not dramatically, the way air pressure changes when a door opens at the top of a tall building. Subtle, immediate. Jackson Reed walked in. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps it was the suit. Dark charcoal, perfectly fitted, the kind that does not announce itself, but makes every other garment in the room feel slightly underdressed. He wore a neatly trimmed beard, just the faintest silver the jaw. He moved through the room with the easy, deliberate calm of a man who had long since made peace with exactly where he was going. His deputy, a young woman Lucia did not recognize, was half a step behind him, speaking quietly near his shoulder. He nodded once, shook hands with the project director, greeted the city liaison by first name. He had not looked at Lucia yet. She picked up her pen so her hands would have something to do. The project director called the meeting to order and introduced the key stakeholders around the table. When he reached Jackson, CEO of Forge Dynamics, our primary development partner on this initiative, and the face of last month's Forbes cover. There was a warm ripple around the table. Someone said quietly, "We are honored to have you." Jackson simply nodded. "Let us build something worth being proud of." 5 words. No performance. Just intention. The meeting moved forward. Lucia delivered her communications framework with precision. Her research was thorough. Her strategy was sound. Her presentation was exactly what the room needed. She was operating on 2 tracks simultaneously. The professional one, sharp and capable, and a second, quieter frequency beneath it. Cataloging small details she had no business noticing. The way he held his pen. The way he listened. Fully. With his attention entirely on whoever was speaking. Not the way executives often listen, which is to wait for their turn. He actually heard people. He had always heard people. When the formal portion ended and the room softened into handshakes and side conversations, Lucia found herself standing near the credenza, pouring water she did not need. She felt him approach before she heard him. "Mrs. Langston." His voice was low, entirely courteous, and completely, precisely distant. The way a person speaks to someone they have no unresolved feeling toward. Not cold. Simply finished. Lucia turned. For a moment she could not speak. She looked at this man she had shared 9 years of her life with, whose handwriting she still recognized across the room, whose way of listening she could still identify from 20 feet away, and felt the strange vertigo of seeing someone utterly familiar standing before her as a stranger. Jackson clears throat a breath. You have changed. He looked at her. Not through her. Directly at her. 3 full seconds. The kind that stretch. Then he said calmly, without malice, when a foundation cracks, no amount of paint can fix it. Eventually, gravity wins. A pause. He turned his gaze briefly toward the window, toward the skyline below. The one he had spent 5 years quietly reshaping. Fortunately, he said, I have learned how to rebuild from the ground up. The faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere and has no particular need to explain the journey to anyone. Then he turned back toward the room and was, just like that, already in another conversation. Lucia stood still. The iPad in her hands went dark. She stared at her own reflection in the black screen for a moment. A woman who had spent years making very careful calculations and had gotten the most important variable entirely wrong. She had believed she was leaving boredom for ambition, routine for excitement. She had told herself that a man who came home every night, who remembered how she took her coffee, who pulled his chair a little closer when she was talking about something she cared about, that all of it was ordinary, small, not enough. What she understood now, watching Jackson move through a room full of Atlanta's most powerful decision makers with nothing more than composure and complete competence, was that she had not left boredom. She had left a man who was building something remarkable and simply had not yet told her the full scale of it. And the thing that cut deepest was not his success. It was his tone. Mrs. Langston. Not Lucia. Not spoken with warmth or bitterness or anything that suggested he carried the weight of their history with him into rooms. Just her current name. Acknowledged the way you acknowledge any professional contact. Clean. Correct. Filed. He was not performing indifference. He was not suppressing rage beneath a composed surface. He was genuinely, completely free of her. And that honest, total freedom was something she had no defense against. Because there was nothing to push back against. He had moved on. All the way on. After the room emptied, Lucia remained at the window. Below, the construction site was already active. Crews moving through the November chill. Steel frames rising in the low morning light. She looked down at all of it and had one clear, quiet thought. He designed this. Not just the building. The entire constellation of partnerships, investments, civic relationships, and technical innovation that she had been hired to give a public voice to. All of it had grown from the mind of a man who used to sit across from her at the kitchen table at midnight, sketching quietly while she scrolled her phone. She pulled up the Forbes article one more time. Near the bottom of the piece, a quote from an anonymous colleague. Jackson does not need to be the loudest person in the room. He just needs to be right. And he usually is. She put her phone away, gathered her things. She held herself together through the lobby, through the revolving door, out onto the sidewalk where the Atlanta air was sharp and cold. She kept walking. She thought about the night she had called Ephraim from the kitchen, the divorce papers shaking in her hand. She thought about his response. That sleepy, unbothered laugh. Guess the boring engineer finally grew a spine. She thought about what she had believed in that moment. How certain she had been. How wrong. She had 3 more weeks on this project. 3 more weeks in the same rooms as Jackson Reed. She told herself she was a professional and this was a contract and she was completely fine. She had always been very good at telling herself that. She was getting considerably worse at believing it. She thought the hardest part was already behind her. She was wrong. Because what was locked away in the site office, a worn document with handwritten notes in the margins, was going to undo her completely. There is a particular kind of grief that does not announce itself all at once. It arrives in pieces. In the smell of a coffee brand you stopped buying years ago. In the way a stranger holds a pen. Left-handed. The same way someone you used to know always held theirs. In the shape of a window in a building going up across the street. And the sudden, unreasonable certainty that you recognize the thinking behind it. Lucia had been managing that grief for 5 years by keeping herself in motion. Full calendar, full schedule, full house. As long as her days were packed with forward movement, she did not have to sit still long enough to feel what was underneath. But this project, these rooms, these drawings, this skyline rising outside every window, was making stillness unavoidable. It was a Thursday afternoon, 6 days after the kickoff meeting. The project teams had cleared out early for the holiday weekend. The temporary site office on the upper floor was quiet in the way large, half-furnished workspaces get quiet. The HVAC humming. The street noise muffled far below. Every footstep slightly too loud. Lucia had stayed late to finalize the stakeholder communications calendar. That was the official reason. The honest reason was that the house in Buckhead had been feeling less like a home and more like a very expensive room she happened to sleep in. And she was not ready to go back to it yet. She was working at the long work table in the side office. A back room lined with rolled drawings, stacked project binders, the clean utilitarian smell of blueprint paper. She reached across the table for a binder and sent a stack of document folders sliding off the far edge. She muttered something under her breath and went around to gather them. Environmental assessment, structural load summary, municipal permit file. She stacked them back in order. Then, under all of it, she found a single spiral-bound document with a worn cover, the corners soft from handling. Forge Dynamics Business Development Plan March 2019 Internal Draft Confidential. She picked it up slowly. She recognized the cover label immediately. Not the document itself, but the handwriting on it. She had spent 9 years reading that handwriting on grocery lists and birthday cards and sticky notes pressed to the bathroom mirror. She did not need to think about it. She simply knew it. She should have set it down, flagged it for the project coordinator, moved on. She opened it. The first half was standard business architecture, market analysis, revenue projections, the structural prop tech positioning she had now read about in Forbes. She schemed it. Near the back of the document, a tab divider read Long-Term Vision Section 7 Family Legacy. She almost did not turn to it. She turned to it. It was not a financial projection. The printed text was secondary to the handwritten annotations that filled the margins, Jackson's precise, slightly compressed writing, smaller and closer together, the way he wrote when he was thinking quickly. She angled the document toward the window light to read it clearly. South-facing nursery for our first child. Lucia loves warm light. She read that line twice. Her throat moved. She swallowed. Soundproof home office for Lucia's PR empire. She will need it when the big contracts start coming. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the page. Family office fund structured so our children never carry the weight of starting from zero. She turned the page. Hand-sketched floor plans, loose, freehand, the kind Jackson drew when he was thinking through a space rather than drafting it formally. A house, larger than their apartment, a wraparound porch with dimensions penciled in, a backyard annotated in his careful hand. Garden for Lucia. Fire pit for me. Room for the kids to run. She pressed her free hand to her mouth. She was still standing there, the document open, her eyes moving slowly over the pages, when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Jackson stepped into the doorway of the side office. He stopped when he saw her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. He looked at the document in her hands. Something passed across his face, just a flicker, quickly resolved. Then he was composed again. He stepped inside the room, stood on the opposite side of the work table, hands easy at his sides. I thought I deleted that, he said. His voice was quiet, almost to himself. Administrative oversight. Lucia looked up at him. She opened her mouth once and closed it. Jackson. Her voice came out unsteady, smaller than she intended. You planned everything. You planned our child's room. You planned my office. While I was. She stopped. She could not get to the end of the sentence. He did not respond immediately. He looked at her with the calm, complete attention he had always given things he had already fully processed, the way an engineer looks at a structure he has analyzed, understood, and made his peace with. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured, not cold, something past cold, something that had moved through cold and come out the other side into a quieter, harder clarity. I had already named our first child, he said. Kai. It means fire. A pause. His eyes stayed on hers. I thought you would be the fire that kept our home warm. The room was very still. Turns out, he said softly, you were the fire that burned it down. The air left Lucia's lungs all at once. She looked down at the sketch of the south-facing nursery, at her own name written in the margin of a business plan, tucked into a future that had been designed around her without her knowledge, by a man she had dismissed while he was doing it. Jackson reached across the table. He picked up the document, rolled it the way he rolled every drawing, carefully, precisely, and placed it in the recycling bin beside the table. Lucia crossed the room immediately. She reached in and pulled it back out, her hands unsteady, and held it against her chest. She sat down in the chair beside the work table, holding the document close, her breath hitching. She did not try to stop the tears. She just let them come. Jackson stood on the other side of the room. He did not move toward her. He did not move away. He let her arrive at it on her own, which was, she understood even through the grief, the most him thing possible. He had always known the difference between a person who needed comfort and a person who needed to face something. When her breathing steadied, she looked up. Her composure entirely gone. I am sorry, she said. I am so sorry. I did not. She stopped. Tried again. I did not see you. I looked right at you for 9 years and I did not see you. Jackson was quiet for a moment. He looked at her steadily. You saw me, he said. You decided I was not enough of what you were looking for. He said it without cruelty, without anger, with the clean, clear honesty of a man who had spent a long time understanding something and was no longer willing to soften it for anyone's comfort. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the door. Real love is architecture, Lucia. He paused at the doorway, his back to her, his voice dropping to something almost private. Once the foundation collapses, the building does not stand, no matter how beautiful the exterior looks. He walked out. She sat alone in the side office, holding the worn document against her chest, listening to his footsteps move down the hallway and disappear. Outside the window, the construction site was lit by work lamps in the early dark, steel frames casting long, overlapping shadows across the ground below. Something new was going up. It had been going up for 5 years. She simply had not been paying attention. She thought about fire, the kind that warms a house on a cold night, the kind that takes everything in an hour. She had been both. She had chosen wrong. She sat there for a long time before she trusted herself to stand. She thought the worst was behind her. She had 6 days left, and in those 6 days everything was going to come apart in front of 600 people, and she was going to be the one who finally said enough. The Atlanta Riverfront Renaissance Launch Gala was the kind of event the city throws when it wants to remind itself of how far it has come. The venue was a glass atrium at the northern end of the development corridor, soaring ceilings, cantilevered balconies, the kind of architecture that makes you stop in the center of the room and look up and feel small in the best possible way. 600 guests, Atlanta civic leadership, its development community, its philanthropic class, its media. The room had the warm golden glow of good lighting and people who understood how to occupy a well-designed space. Lucia had been there since 6 o'clock. She was the communications lead. In many ways, this event was hers. She moved through it with the precision she brought to everything. Checking with the AV team, confirming the speaker timeline with the executive director, greeting the mayor's office liaison by name. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. Even when everything beneath the professional surface was considerably less composed. Ephraim had arrived 40 minutes late in a pale blue suit, loud from the moment he cleared the entrance, working the room with the practiced energy of a man who believes every space improves upon his arrival. Lucia had watched him from across the atrium and felt something she could only describe as the final departure of an illusion she had been holding on to far too long. She had known for some time that she needed to end this marriage. The site office, the document, the handwritten margins, Jackson's voice saying the fire that burned it down. Those had not been the cause of the decision. They had simply brought the clarity. There was also something else she had been carrying quietly for 3 weeks now. A private fact she had not yet shared with anyone. She pressed her hand briefly to her stomach, then let it fall. One thing at a time. The week before the gala, while waiting outside Jackson's office for a contract review, she had overheard the young woman speaking quietly on her phone, clearly mid-conversation, unaware that Lucia had arrived. "Yamila, he will be home soon. Is the champagne ready?" A soft laugh, then the call ended. The assistant looked up, noticed Lucia, and neither of them said a word about it. But Lucia had heard it. She knew what a warm home sounded like. She knew the difference now between a house where someone checked whether you were coming back and one where your presence was primarily decorative. The gala speeches concluded. The room opened into the easy warmth of a successful evening. Guests circulating, conversations loosening, champagne moving through the crowd. Jackson was near the north end of the atrium with the project director and 2 council members, listening the way he always listened, fully, without reservation. Lucia was on the opposite side of the room, managing a conversation with a local journalist. When she saw Ephraim begin to move through the crowd, she read the trajectory. She started toward him. But the room was dense with guests and Ephraim was already there. He planted himself in front of Jackson, loud enough for the nearest 40 people to hear without effort. "Read." He raised his champagne glass in a mock salute. Quite a party for someone who started with nothing. His grin was wide and entirely for the room. "I married your wife. I took everything you had. How does it feel standing here now?" The room went quiet in the immediate radius. Jackson looked at Ephraim. No visible gathering of himself, no tightening of the jaw. He was simply already completely composed. The way a well-built structure does not brace against the wind because it is already accounted for it. "You are confusing stealing with taking out the trash," Jackson said, quiet, almost conversational. "I did not lose anything. I just cleaned house." A beat of silence, then from behind Ephraim, Lucia set her champagne glass on the nearest table. She walked forward. The crowd shifted to let her through. The natural parting that happens when someone moves with a particular kind of intention. She stopped beside Ephraim, looked at him steadily for one long moment, then turned to face the room. 600 people, the full weight of Atlanta's civic and social world watching with the focused attention of witnesses. Her voice was clear, steady, the voice she used when she needed a room to truly hear her. "I am ending my marriage to Ephraim." A pause. "I have spent 5 years with someone who does not know the difference between a partner and a trophy. I should have said so a long time ago." The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Ephraim's response was loud, ugly, and entirely beneath the room. 2 members of the venue's security team were already moving before he finished. He went out the side exit with considerably less dignity than he had arrived with, the door closing firmly behind him. The room exhaled. Conversations resumed, cautiously at first, then in the full rolling tide of a crowd that has witnessed something genuine and decided collectively to continue its evening. Lucia stood where she had stood. Her ears rang faintly. She felt hollowed out and strangely clear. The particular lightness that follows a decision you cannot take back and that you know with absolute certainty was the right one. She turned. Jackson was looking at her from across the room. His expression had not shifted from its settled composure, but something moved through his eyes in the moment their gaze met. Not warmth, exactly. Not approval. Something quieter than either. The recognition of one person by another who has known them long enough to understand what something costs. He nodded once, small, private. Then he turned back to the project director and the gala moved forward without them. Lucia stood alone in the warm light of the atrium, surrounded by 600 people, holding nothing. She had said what needed to be said. She had made the decision she should have made months ago. And somewhere in this building, the man she had once called boring was wrapping up a conversation about a $2.2 billion project he had built from a hard drive and a suitcase. And he was completely, entirely fine. She thought about that for a long time. She thought maybe she could learn to be fine, too. One day. She had said what needed to be said. But there was one more moment left. Outside, in the rain, where nothing could be performed and nothing could be taken back. And what Jackson said next was the kind of thing you carry for the rest of your life. It was raining again. Atlanta in November does this. A quiet, persistent rain that settles in for the evening without any fuss. The kind that blurs the street lights and softens the edges of everything and makes the whole city look like it was painted by someone who understood that beauty and sadness often arrive together. Lucia found Jackson near the coat check, in the side corridor off the main atrium, away from the crowd. He was waiting for his coat with the calm patience of a man who has never once rushed out of a room before he was ready to leave it. She crossed the corridor quickly. She had the unreasonable fear that if she did not say this now, the moment would close and she would carry it for the rest of her life in a bottom drawer beside a photograph she had no right to keep. Jackson. She stopped a few feet from him. Please. He turned, waited. I know you do not owe me anything, she said. I know what I did. I know it is too late. I am not asking for what I threw away. She pressed forward, her voice unsteady but committed. I just need you to know that I see it now, all of it. What you were building, what you were, what we could have. Her voice broke on the last word. She steadied herself. I am so sorry. And if there is any part of you that he raised one hand, gently, not dismissively, the way you place a hand on a door to stop it from swinging further than it should. Lucia. His voice was quiet, unhurried, the voice of a man who had already arrived at his answer long before she started the question. I have already built a new home. He said it simply. No triumph in it. No cruelty. Just truth. Stated with the clean finality of a load-bearing wall. Before she could respond, the side door to the corridor swung open. A current of cool November air moved through the hall, carrying the sound of rain. A black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened. A woman stepped out. She was tall, composed, wearing a deep burgundy coat over a simple dark dress, close-cropped natural hair. The kind of presence that does not require a room's attention because it has never needed it. She read the doorway in one unhurried glance. Jackson, and the woman beside him whose evening had clearly come apart at some point. Then her eyes settled on Jackson with a warmth that was entirely private and entirely genuine. This was Yamila Ellis. She had joined Forge Dynamics in its second year as a senior design partner when the company was still operating out of a leased office with second-hand chairs and a coffee maker Jackson had brought from his apartment. She had stayed late on countless nights, not because anyone required it, but because she understood what they were building and believed in it completely. Somewhere between the third year and the fourth, between shared meals over project drawings and long conversations about what they had each learned from their most difficult seasons, she had become the one person Jackson could be entirely unguardedly himself with. She had never once called him boring. She glanced at Lucia, not with coldness, not with superiority, with something quieter, something that felt, in its own way, closer to empathy than anything else. The look of a woman who had heard the broad shape of the story and had simply hoped it would end with some measure of dignity for everyone involved. Jackson walked to her. At the threshold of the door, he paused. He turned back and looked at Lucia one final time. His voice dropped, not for the rain, but because what he had to say did not require volume to carry weight. "I do not hate you, Lucia." A breath. "I just regret that you chose to walk away from the foundation instead of build it with me." He held her gaze for a moment. "Today you see me on the cover of Forbes, but you do not know, you could not know, that you were once the reason I started building in the first place." A pause, not for effect, for honesty. "And you were also the reason I learned how to let go and build again for myself." He stepped through the door. Yamila's hand found his as they reached the car. The door closed. The black car pulled away from the curb, its tail lights warm and red in the rain, then turned the corner and was gone. Lucia stood alone in the doorway. She pushed through the door and stepped out into the rain. She did not reach for her phone. She did not flag a car. She just stood there on the wet sidewalk as the November rain soaked through her dress, cold and honest against her skin. She thought about the quiet fact she was still carrying, the one she had pressed her hand to briefly inside the atrium. A new life beginning. One that knew nothing yet of foundations or fire or the cost of choosing wrong. One that would need her to figure out how to build something solid starting now from whatever she had honestly left. She stood there a long time. She thought about what it would mean to start over, not from the comfortable middle of a life that looked right from the outside, but from the actual ground with only what she had earned. She thought about Jackson's voice. "The reason I learned how to let go and build again." She wondered, for the first time, with something that did not feel entirely like grief, whether she could learn that, too. She did not know the answer yet, but she was, at last, asking the right question. Inside the black car, it was warm. The rain moved across the windows in long, quiet rivulets, the city sliding past in amber and soft gold. Yamila's hand rested over Jackson's. Neither of them spoke for a moment. They did not need to. The kind of quiet that fills a space like that is the kind you spend years earning. Jackson looked out at the Atlanta night, at the skyline he had, piece by piece and year by year, helped reshape. He thought about a suitcase packed behind coats, a ring set on a dark screen, the years of midnight work and slow, patient accumulation of everything he had refused to surrender. He thought about a name he had once chosen. Kai. Fire. The warmth he had planned for. And the fire that had taken the plan instead. He turned to Yamila. She was already looking at him, steady, warm, no performance in it. And he felt what he always felt beside her, the particular, irreplaceable peace of being genuinely known. He smiled, small, real. She squeezed his hand once. The car moved through the rain. Here is what this story teaches us, and most of us already know it in our bones. We just forget it when the glamour walks through the door. Loyalty is not exciting. It does not arrive in a pale blue suit or fill a room with loud laughter. It looks like a man at the kitchen table at midnight, sketching quietly, making room for you in plans he has not yet shown you. It looks like a hand that remembers exactly how you take your coffee without being asked. Those things feel ordinary right up until the day they are gone. If you have loved someone steady and true, a husband who fixed things without being asked, a son who called every Sunday without fail, a man who was never the loudest voice in any room, but was always, quietly, the most reliable one. Do not let the world convince you that steadiness is a small thing. It is the only thing that lasts. Tonight, before you turn off the lamp, pull out a piece of paper, not your phone, actual paper, and write down one moment when someone's quiet loyalty held you together. A specific moment. The Tuesday he drove you to the appointment without asking why. The winter he shoveled the walk before you even woke up. Write it down. Keep it somewhere you will find it again. That is not a small memory. That is a foundation. And foundations built honestly, they stand. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, do you think Lucia deserves a chance at rebuilding her life? Or has she finally learned her lesson too late? 2 or 3 words. I read every single one, written from a human heart with AI support. This story only hopes to send you a warm message. Kindness is never wasted. And even when the world feels harsh, there is always the light of justice and beautiful things quietly returning to those who are kind.